PlayStation phone is going to run. It's going to be Android, apparently 2.3, so that's gingerbread. And I cannot remember which source it was. I'm just going to check very quickly. Oh, it's just one of the Android community things. So he talks about more of a kind of a leak thing. So probably you cannot be sure it's true yet. But apparently it's going to be an Android Sony device, and it's going to be PlayStation based on a Linux kernel. So that's the achievement.
Did I hear right? I could have got this wrong, but I'm sure I saw an ident somewhere at some point that someone mentioned the Android 3.0, the code name for that was just sort of changed overnight, and that was now going to be 2.3. Is that right, or am I imagining things?
I hadn't seen that, to be fair. Roy?
Yeah, I've never been.
That may have just been someone interpreting it wrong, or my tired eyes reading that wrong. I don't know, but we'll chalk that one up to my eyesight.
Well, if it's right, you're hot off the press then. So we'll probably have...
Don't blame me. I'm sure I saw it on Identica, so someone else said it, and I'm just repeating it.
Yeah. I'm wondering if I should bring up the issue of feminism and the whole. Have you heard about conferences and events and what they say about the? Do you think we should bring up the topic?
I think a topic like that deserves a segment at the beginning of our next show, because it's an important topic and a lot of time can be spent discussing it. So what I'm going to suggest is that we move on to our discussion point of the day. I'm aware that the audio cast is pressing on now, and obviously our patient people that are still listening to the show will be keen for us to get on to our next topic, which is the one about Microsoft. And it wouldn't be a TechBytes show without mentioning Microsoft in at least one discussion. So without further ado, I'll introduce this one in. This discussion is going to be based around an article based on the Linux for You website. It's an online magazine, I believe, and this is a website. This is an article that I've run recently. It's a interview with Microsoft and one of their writers. I believe he's VJ. I'm not going to try to pronounce his surname because I'll just embarrass myself and disrespect him, so I won't try to pronounce that name. And basically, they've had an interview with Microsoft titled "Microsoft is working towards establishing a long-term community connection," and basically it's about Microsoft's intentions in regards to the community, in inverted commas, open source community and open source software. And this is going to be our main talking points for the show. Now, I would suggest probably that anybody listening to this checks out the link on the show notes first, so they can get an idea of what's been said and what's been asked, and then it'll make more sense as to how we're discussing what we're discussing now. So, Roy and Gordon, I hope you've read or had a chance to read this article, because it did hit quite a few dents.
Yeah, I think it's very much the old news, or just a repetition of the same talking points as before. And it's important to actually tackle this article, because the Linux magazine which presented this thing was not trying to do a job challenging the person, but more of giving the person a platform. One thing I was going to say, though, is in any of these cases, people probably ask, who is this person anyway? Because they know Sam Ramji. Previous to, before him, you had a person called Bill Hale, who was a bit more kind of aggressive person who would talk about Linux and patents, and try at the same time to be diplomatic with so-called open source companies, including those which Microsoft was trying to promote under the shared source banner, which isn't exactly open source. It's just kind of a way of using words to confuse people. And then, so there is this person, and he plays the same old spiel about, Microsoft wants to be open, and you could try to use Windows, and we've been opening, and there is the new Microsoft. And I'm just wondering, Gordon, if you have anything to say about that. The only thing that springs to mind at this moment is the fact that Microsoft, the assumption is that Microsoft and others like Apple hate open source, and that's not strictly true. What they do like
as open source under a license that they can exploit. That they can take code that's already created by other people, package it up, call it something else, and say they invented it, and build it in and build hooks into it that only apply to their, in Microsoft's case, to make it a Windows exclusive. Either bundle it somehow that the only version that people actually are going to be using is Microsoft's own, and they don't publish any of the compatibility stuff to make it incompatible and take ownership of something that someone else already created, and in some cases even patent something that someone else has created to then use to sue the original creators. So Microsoft don't hate open source. They only hate the parts that prevent them from abusing it, essentially.
Yeah, I think there is the part that's agnostic and the part that's hostile, and there is the part that's more friendly. So we have to divide open source, which is a large umbrella, including the BSDs and GPL and so on. So there is the friendly part, and that's the BSD. So both Microsoft and Apple would like to have this code which allows them to save money on development of the kernels or the module to do with networking. That's where Microsoft uses the BSD, or in the case of Apple, they like to use what they now call Darwin. That's the kernel of the operating system, which gives them a kind of a Unix environment, and that's fine for them because it works extremely well for them, and they like people working from the outside and contributing to the company's wealth and to the company's quality assurance, so to speak.
Well, sorry, I was going to quickly add in there. The GPL is essentially kryptonite to these companies. That's why they're trying to kill it, because they have no choice under the GPL but to give their changes back. And if they have to give their changes back, it means that they can be implemented and force interoperability again, which is they're trying to break interoperability. So the GPL is kryptonite for them. That's why they're desperate to have nothing to do with it, and kill it off, and so yeah.
Yeah, as I spoke about the friendly part, this is where they really like so-called open source, because open source in this case usually means freebie, or it means, well, it's code we can use and it's code that we can claim to be ours and proprietarize that and put our banners and logos and things on it. There is the agnostic part, and that's the, or at least the indifferent part, where they basically say, well, come and use our operating system and run whatever it is. It can be Firefox, it can be Thunderbird, it can be even Apache on Windows, and we'll be fine with it if you run it on Windows. Now, this is what they don't care if it's open source or if it's proprietary, and if it's something else, even worse, as long as it runs on their platform. So if you're using Firefox or if you use Opera on Windows, Microsoft couldn't care less. Opera is proprietary and Firefox is open source, but they don't care because people come to Windows to use these things in certain cases, and it doesn't matter to Microsoft. This is where Microsoft doesn't mind open source. It's just one way of creating applications for Windows. Now, the point where they don't like open source is when certain things take control away from them, or when there is a rival operating system or a rival office suite or something which replaces a commodity of the basically some of the crown jewels of Microsoft. And you have several of these. Also, you have things like Java, which take away from the development community, which Microsoft is trying to foster. So there is this is the part that I'm most concerned about, because when a company like Mozilla makes an exe file for Windows that's called Firefox, people don't really have much control over the source code. They don't actually get it from a repository, and everything is built very specifically for Windows. And this is the point where I kind of say, well, people don't exactly have Firefox as free software, and they run it with Windows, and once you actually compile it for Windows, it has a lot of dependency upon the platform. And the same goes for OS X. It is a very, once you do all the linking and everything else, the binary is very much bound to the platform, which is proprietary. So this is where I kind of think this is not open source. And also, when when you're using OS 10 or when you're using Windows and you know there is BSD code inside, it's not really open source. It's basically a proprietarized version of open source. Well, you could maybe try and pull the code out if you really ask nicely. Companies like Apple or Microsoft can say, okay, now please